I've already checked out some of the best $2 DSiWare games on 3DS eShop before they're gone in March 2023. Now it's time to see what's offered at the $5 price point. I tried to focus on games of different genres, so there should be something for everyone in this video. I'm a huge handheld Castlevania fan. The console versions not so much. So when I decided to make this video, I pushed Soul of Darkness to the top of the list. According to what I saw, it's a $5 Castlevania clone that's actually good. I had huge expectations going in, and believe it or not, they were all met. To get the obvious out of the way, this is literally just Castlevania. Vampires exist, you go into a castle, and then someone who totally isn't Dracula steals your wife or girlfriend or friend with benefits, and then you have to fight your way through a bunch of enemies to get her back. Like I said, it's Castlevania. But Soul of Darkness copies all the right things. The gameplay is pretty much a clone of every other GBA or DS Castlevania, though you will find a few things like critical hits and an upgrade system. There was something lost in translation though. The movement. This is very minor in the grand scheme of things, it just took some time getting used to. Instead of holding right to walk and double tapping right to run, it's more momentum based. You hold right and you start off at a walk, then a second later begin running. For any Castlevania veterans, this will result in missed jumps early on because it's completely foreign. But once I got used to it, you know what? It was Castlevania. Getting into what Soul of Darkness does differently, instead of one giant continuous castle, you play several smaller levels and some are capped off by boss fights, though not all disappointingly. It's $5, so I can't exactly blame them for going in this direction. Something I preferred over Castlevania is the amount of environment interactivity. You're constantly breaking down chandeliers to crash down onto enemies or using your magic to break a ledge so you can climb down. And while a lot of the enemies look like they were copied from Castlevania, there's still a good amount of variety. And I guess I should mention the DSi camera feature. At certain points, you can use the camera to take a picture of something. Whatever that something's color, you unlock a crystal that can increase your health or magic. Problem is, the 3DS camera sucks and I never got it to work. But it's there if you want to give it a try. The upgrade system in Soul of Darkness is handled absolutely perfectly. Instead of behind the scenes damage boosts that don't impact gameplay, now your combos have more hits or your ice spear fires 3 instead of 1. For a $5 game that came out 12 years ago, the amount of detail placed into the upgrades is amazing. While Soul of Darkness isn't terribly long, the 10 levels take roughly 10 minutes each to beat, they do mix things up from time to time. One level has you flying on a weird bird thing, dodging and slashing enemies. There's also moments where you have to ascend up an elevator, again, dodging and slashing enemies. Plus, the ice spear is used to solve puzzles, and you're given the ability to transform into a few different enemies to progress through certain levels. It's astounding how much Gameloft was able to do with Soul of Darkness, and for only $5. As for gripes, they're very minor. The story is lackluster and standard fare for the genre, the 3DS's camera detection never worked for me, and I wish it was twice as long because I was enjoying it so much. But that's it. For all intents and purposes, this is a $5 Castlevania game. If you missed the franchise as much as I do, and the Advanced Collection on Switch left you wanting more, here you go. It'd be an understatement to say the level of quality far exceeded my expectations. Soul of Darkness earns its spot in S tier, and as someone who rarely replays games, I will definitely beat Soul of Darkness on hard mode in the future. After the high of Soul of Darkness, I was expecting a lull. Like starting off an album with the best song, I figured it was only downhill from there. Unfortunately, I was kinda right. Dark Void Zero is an old school Metroidvania. It leans more heavily on the Metroid side of things, equipping Rusty with a gun that is exchanged at numerous intervals with more powerful weapons. You also lean heavily on a jetpack to traverse the stages, which adds a level of speed and verticality that you won't find in a regular Metroid game until you've unlocked all of the upgrades. Based on all that, you'd think I would have really enjoyed Dark Void Zero, right? Well, you know how I said it was old school? That applies to all aspects, not just the graphics and music. Platforming when you don't have your jetpack is very slow and methodical, shooting and movement lacks the smoothness I want, and the difficulty is unforgiving, even on easy. My first attempt in Dark Void Zero was on normal. I lost a few lives from the one-hit kill lava, and other times it was due to the enemies dealing a good chunk of damage with each hit. So I moved to easy. There wasn't much of a difference. The enemy spawn rate seemed to be the same, and lava was still a one-hit kill. The only noticeable difference I saw was that health hearts showed up a little bit more frequently. Even with that, I still saw game over before beating the first level. On my third attempt of the first level, second on easy, I did beat it. I was very proud of myself for conquering such a tough section. Then Dark Void Zero threw a boss fight at me that I wasn't prepared for, I died, and it sent me back into a level I'd previously beaten. It was so demoralizing. There's a reason you don't see 100 gameplay videos of Bloodborne or Elden Ring on my channel. I'm not a fan of hard games. I just don't enjoy the constant dying and restarting. So I took a quick breather and returned ready for a challenge. But Dark Void Zero still made it into this video, albeit in B tier. That's because I did begin to enjoy it. I began to memorize the flow of the level and mission structure, and most importantly, I began to understand how the developers wanted me to play it, not how I wanted to play it. And when I came back like Kim Kardashian, I beat the first level on my first try, and I beat the second level losing only a single life. Turns out, when you have those health boosts, the game is actually fairly easy and pretty enjoyable. The map on the top screen is super helpful in the maze-like levels, always pointing you to where you need to go next so you aren't lost. The second level also expands the number of weapons you have and enemies you face, and I was, again, really starting to enjoy myself. In fact, I managed to beat the whole game on easy with only losing that one life. It's not just because I'm amazing. It's also because Dark Void Zero has 3 levels. That's it. And each takes about 10 to 15 minutes, and each caps off with the same boss fight, though a slightly more difficult version each time. You see that map on the right hand screen? That's the size of the first level. The second and third are more involved, but that's it. Plus, there's a good amount of backtracking involved. So, to spend more than an hour on Dark Void Zero, I tackled the game again on normal. It was fine. My balls were still dry though. I beat it without ever seeing game over, though I will admit things were more intense. Normal mode also highlighted the bullcrap enemy respawn rate. Even if you barely move out of their location, once you backtrack even a little bit, they're there waiting for you. Super annoying. After beating Dark Void Zero on normal, I felt no desire whatsoever to tackle it on hard, partly because the game itself doesn't change in the way I'd like, and partly because I knew I'd suck a butt. My opinion on the low health indicator never changed though. You know how in old Pokemon games when your Pokemon was low on health and that annoying sound would play on a never-ending loop? Well, the sound here is more annoying. All in all though, Dark Void Zero is very challenging and the gameplay is decades old. Personally, I never would have bought it outside of a YouTube video because I want to have fun and not think too hard when playing a game. But if you're in the mood for a tough, short 2D shooting platformer that looks like it came out in the early 90s, Dark Void Zero is for you. For someone like me though, I can't put it any higher than B tier. When I made that video about spending $100 on the best DSiWare games, it was the first time I'd seen a lot of them in action. My research consisted almost entirely of just going on Reddit, seeing what people enjoyed and adding them to a list. So when I saw Kappus Trail for the first time, I was intrigued. It looked fun and sort of like a more colorful Phantom Hourglass or Spirit Tracks. In reality, it's more like the DS Zelda games made a baby with Kirby Canvas Curse, while Pikmin watched in the corner telling knock-knock jokes. You play as a Kappa in a Kappus Trail. I'm not sure what a Kappa is, but apparently it's a weird duck thing with a giant head. You use the stylus to guide the Kappa through stages, all while dodging enemies and tapping obstacles like boulders to clear your path. Now, I know what you're thinking. If P isn't stored in the balls, what exactly are the balls for? And you're right. With any game like this, you want to know how the controls are before anything else. The answer is, the controls are absolutely perfect. I never had an issue with the trail or the stylus, and if you do make a mistake with your trail, you can either use the scissor icon to completely eliminate your path, or you can just redraw from a certain point and continue on from there. Plus, a Kappus Trail throws several enemies at you that you have to dodge, and if you get too close to a ledge, the Kappa will start sweating. It's just a nice little touch that helps add to the charm of this game. If that's all there was to a Kappus Trail, I'd probably still include it on this list, but the developers went above and beyond. For starters, you collect Pikmin-like creatures called mini Kappas throughout the levels that can do things like beat up enemies or create a bridge to new areas. To further expand the game, there's an enemy called the Devil's Hand that chases you. The Devil's Hand will follow along your previously drawn trails, so if you aren't careful, it can catch up to you and bring you back to the beginning of the level. It's clear the developers were heavily inspired by Zelda and Kirby Canvas Curse, but they weren't just content with a simple copy and paste. They added their own uniqueness to the experience, making it stand out from those borrowed from. If you absolutely despise touchscreen controlled DS games, a Kappus Trail is exactly that. But if you want more Phantom Hourglass or more Kirby Canvas Curse, this is a game you need to add to your DSiWare collection. In terms of length, I was fully expecting the game to end after the first 4 levels. They all offered some level of variety, had decent length, and the 4th and final level was more intense than any moment I can remember from Spirit Tracks. And if the story did end there, that would have been fine with me. But you know what? After beating the 4th level in the first world, another world with another 4 levels opened up. And there's even more levels after that. Dark Void Zero had 3 total, and a Kappus Trail absolutely blows it out of the water in terms of content. I had set a loose 2-hour time limit for all these games on this video, so it didn't take a month to make. Well, I sailed past that limit with a Kappus Trail and kept playing until I was done. When it comes to difficulty, I feel I need to make a distinction here. There's a difference between hard and challenging. Dark Void Zero is hard, a Kappus Trail is challenging. A Kappus Trail has several hazards in your way and will require quick thinking to survive, but because the controls are never an issue and you can use your wits to outsmart the devil's hand, I never found it outright hard. Plus, things get stupid intense in the boss levels, but never unfair. I know you want me to say something negative about a Kappus Trail, so I will. It's kind of the same negatives that have been plaguing other DSiWare titles, the sound. When you're down to 1 heart, the annoying low health sound never stops. Plus, some of the tracks do repeat too quickly, but overall I'd say the music is awesome. During boss fights, the more you progress, the more intense and fast-paced the song becomes, adding to the frantic pace of the gameplay. That's how good a Kappus Trail is. I can turn its negatives into positives. Unlike Spirit Tracks, where the Spirit Flute is the worst thing ever implemented in a video game ever. I won't talk any more about a Kappus Trail because this is a game you have to play for yourself. If I said anything else, it would be spoiling the experience. I was absolutely blown away by the gameplay and amount of content. For $5, this is a no-brainer and join Soul of Darkness in S tier. And you know what? I'm about to say it. This is better than Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. No cap. No, it's not a third-party game inspired by Wii Music featuring Shrek. Maestro Green Groove is actually a music-based auto-running platformer controlled entirely with the touchscreen. The story sees you wanting to bang a ladybird, but your neighbor or something also wants to fornicate with her, yet she chooses you. Naturally, your evil neighbor removes all music from the world because you wooed her with music. So it's up to you to restore everything back to normal. Gameplay is simple yet complex. Maestro runs across strings, and it's up to you to either strum down to jump up or strum up to jump down. Yes, that also confused me at first too. Along the way, you collect items and hit golden notes in tune with the music, which features modern hits like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Because the songs in Green Groove are from the public domain, it's likely how they were able to keep this at just $5. If they'd paid money for Nickelback tracks, this would have cost thousands, and it would have been worth it because that's the best band in the world. Green Groove starts off easy, but quickly ramps up in difficulty. You go from simple jumping on strings and hitting singular golden notes to the screen littered with items, enemies to tap in rhythm, and multiple strings to strum, all while making sure you're on the right path. If you were hoping for a relaxing musical adventure, this isn't it. Your stylus will constantly be rubbing its head against the screen, hoping to get a perfect stroke with every note. All in all, the gameplay is fun. It evoked memories of Rock Band and Guitar Hero mixed with a little Elite Beat agents, though Green Groove does do enough to separate itself from the rest of the pack, both for the better and for the worse. Probably my biggest gripe with Green Groove is that there's only 3 songs in the entire game. Yes, you get longer versions of each with harder difficulties, but that's it. 3 songs. There are boss fights that play out like Simon Says with their own 4th theme, but for the regular levels, it's the same 3 over and over. I should also point out that the difficulty spike between normal and hard is a bit shocking. Easy is super easy and normal is beatable on the first try, while hard is going to take repeated attempts. I found the runway on your string to be shorter than I needed for quick decisions, and unless I'm crazy, knowing when to jump up versus down is purely visual, but the camera is too zoomed in to fully see which way you're supposed to go. Even with these issues, the gameplay in Green Groove is still solid. Unfortunately, if the difficulty spike doesn't prove to be too much of an obstacle for you, the game is over in an hour. While Maestro Green Groove is a solid B tier placement, the length is a major drawback. There's only 12 levels total in the campaign and 4 songs including the boss theme. Yes, you play the same 4 songs 3 different times, though it is worth adding that the harder the difficulty, the longer the arrangement becomes. Beating Green Groove doesn't unlock very hard difficulty, you can just replay those songs and try to beat your own high score. Had the developers doubled the main campaign, added an endless mode, or at least a mode combining all the songs into one major track, it'd be an easy choice for A tier thanks to the rhythm gameplay. As it is, I can't place it any higher than B tier. In my attempt to diversify the types of games I looked at in this video, the final slot had 3 options: Castle of Magic and Chronos Twins, both 2D platformers, and Starship Defense, a tower defense game with a unique art style. Well, since I felt like there had been enough left to right games in this video, I went with Starship Defense. Though, as I'm writing this, I'm now realizing that if I do a second video for $5 DSiWare games, Castle of Magic and Chronos Twins might both have to be in it, eliminating this whole thing. Anyways, Starship Defense, or Starship Patrol in Europe, is from Q Games, who you probably know from the Pixel Junk series and not the Tomorrow Children. Now, when you hear the words tower defense, an image likely forms in your head of a landscape, a pathway or 2 for enemies to follow, and spots to place your units. In Starship Defense, they switch things up and your starship fleet is the target. So you equip your ships with weapons to blast incoming enemies who do follow a set path. To help differentiate the experience a little, Starship Defense sees defeated enemies dropping energy, which you need to build more weapons. Collecting the energy with the stylus is an easy yet effective way to keep you engaged in battle, rather than just holding down the fast forward button and letting everything play out at double speed like every other tower defense game in the world. Thanks to Dark Void Zero and Maestro, I'd sort of been conditioned to expect an hour, maybe 2 of gameplay in DSiWare games before they're done. But Starship Defense has 30 lengthy levels, and you're not going to see them all unless you get a perfect score each time. Gameplay is fairly deep as well. You start off each battle with the basic weapons, then as you clear waves of enemies, you receive power crystals. Those power crystals are used to unlock more weapons as well as to use SOS cards, which can give you a game-changing boost when you need it most. Power-ups for your units drop randomly in battle and can be given to the unit of your choice, and a nice little touch I enjoyed is the ability to angle your range of fire on units ever so slightly. By the time you reach the 10th level, science weapons become available to you. These are insanely powerful units that can blast away groups of enemies, but obviously they're quite expensive. Around this time, I really hit my groove with Starship Defense. I learned which units were the best against which enemies, and I was getting perfects regularly without feeling like the game was too easy. And even though the first 10 levels took a couple of hours, thanks to me replaying a few for more SOS cards and to get the perfects I missed, that's only a third of the game. There's 30 freaking levels in this thing. I think the developers realized that maybe some people would breeze through the early part of the game. Starship Defense is still challenging, don't worry. So if you're good enough, you can skip the teenage stage and go straight to the legal drinking age in America stages. There's a shipload of levels in Starship Defense, but if you want to speedrun, the option is there as well. Even with all my praise, I still have to put Starship Defense in A tier, albeit at the top of A tier. While it nails everything a tower defense game should be, there just wasn't that defining trait to push it over the edge. With Soul of Darkness, it perfectly copied a franchise I love. With the Kappus Trail, it was an insanely awesome surprise. Starship Defense lacked that something special, but it's still a high A tier game. Any negatives I have don't detract from its greatness. Sure, while it felt like a lot of the newness was gone after the first 10 or so levels, don't worry, they still introduced new enemies and hazards like solar flares and asteroids after that. There's 30 levels in this game. If this was another $5 game from another DSiWare developer, they probably would have stopped at 10 levels anyways. Ultimately, you should get Starship Defense if you're not completely burned out on tower defense games, because it nails everything you want from the genre. And even if you are burnt out on them, it might just reignite your passion. There's a lot more $5 games on DSiWare worth buying, which I'll try to check out in a future episode. If you have any recommendations for the next 5 I should feature, let me know in the comments below.